If you own a 2014 to 2021 Toyota Tundra and you're looking for audio upgrades, we've got 3 awesome products that are only available at TrailGrid Pro. Hey guys, Brian here with TrailGrid Pro. Super pumped to be back with you guys for another installation video. And today we're going to be doing some awesome audio upgrades in our Toyota Tundra. Specifically, we're going to be showing you the installation of our plug-and-play 5-channel amplifier options. Again, these are specifically designed for the 2014 to 2021 Toyota Tundras that are either non-amplified, or if you have the amplified non-JBL option, these will be a direct replacement to improve the audio in your Toyota Tundra. One of the greatest things about any of these kits is that they are going to work perfectly with your factory or your aftermarket head unit. The harness that we've provided with this kit can be easily adapted to fit either the factory connections, or you can use RCAs in an aftermarket application to get the signal from your head unit down to your new amplifier. So since we've mentioned the harness, let's talk about all of the hardware and wiring and everything that you will get with either the Kicker, the Alpine, or the AudX 5-channel amplifier. The first is the main part of the show here. This is our plug-and-play harness. This is going to come with all of the connectors that you need to connect both the head unit and the amplifier. So here we can see this configuration. On one end, we have the year-specific plugs. So this is going to connect behind the radio. So the one we have here is for your 14 to 19 Tundras. We also have connections for your 20 and 21 Tundras. So again, factory or aftermarket radios. You have built-in remote wire. We have built-in ground wire, which is nice so that we can ground the entire system to cut down on interference. And then on the amplifier side, everything is pre-terminated. So you get either forks or ferrules for the output side of your amplifier, and then we're using RCAs for the input side, and then a remote wire. Again, you can see everything is already terminated. It's nice, easy plug and play, and will come set up with the parts that you need when it arrives to your door. So like I said, a super simple installation of the harness. Some of the other things that you will get with your kit is the power and ground wire. We even include a little ground screw, a fuse for the power wire, some protective sheathing. Of course, you're going to need some zip ties. And then the other great thing about this kit is the AudX amplifier mounting bracket that comes with it. So this bracket is designed to fit perfectly under the passenger seat of your Tundra, and is going to use the factory mounting locations for those factory amplifier options to securely mount the amplifier to the floor, so there's no stress about if I'm off-roading or is the amplifier going to move around while I'm driving. The amplifier with the provided amplifier mounting screws will be secured under the seat for a super clean install. One of the other nice things about the harness is you can actually see it here. There is a built-in bass control wire. So the AudX amplifier comes with its own bass control knob in the box. The Alpine amplifier, we include the Alpine bass control knob. And the Kicker amplifier, we provide a Kicker bass control knob. So a lot of customers said that they want to have control over the amount of bass in their vehicle at any times. So using our provided switch blank adapter, we can mount the bass control knob into that and then put it in a switch blank in your truck, again, for a nice clean installation. All right, now that we've talked about all of the stuff that you get for wiring and mounting your amplifiers, let's talk about the 3 amplifier options that will be available on the website. First, over here, this is the AudX 5-channel V1K amplifier. This is a super low profile, super clean 5-channel amplifier. So all of these are 5 channels. So what does that mean? You have 4 channels for your dash and door speakers, and then you have 1 channel for your dedicated subwoofer. So in the Tundra, your dash in your front door, your dash in your front right door, your rear left and your rear right. That is the 4 channels, and then you have 1 for your subwoofer. So the AudX amplifier, super powerful, super clean, a very low profile, easy installation. This one actually plugs directly into the harness, and I'll show you that in a little bit. The second option is the Alpine S2A55V. Again, another great 5-channel amplifier option from Alpine. Again, lots of power, lots of clarity. This thing really performs, and again, fits perfectly under the seat of your Tundra. The third is the Kicker CXA6650T. Again, a awesome 5-channel option from Kicker. So the way that we set all of these amplifiers up, or our kits up, is we just go ahead and use the 5-channel amplifier option. Sure, there's other ways to do it. You could do a 4-channel with a mono block. You could run multiple amplifiers, but for ease of installation and giving you the maximum amount of expandability in the future, we go ahead and we just choose to use a 5-channel option. So if you just want to amplify your dash and your door speakers and you don't really want to run a subwoofer, that's completely fine. All 3 of these will work perfectly for that. Down the road, if you decide, hey, you know what, I'm missing that bass profile and I really think I want to add a subwoofer, well, guess what? Really, no extra installation needed. All the amplifiers will already have a sub channel. All you need to do is run your subwire from the amplifier back to your subwoofer and your job is complete. So again, the goal here is plug and play, easy installation, and leave yourself some room to expand in the future. So before we get into disassembling our Tundra, let's go over some of the tools that we will need to complete this job. Over here in our tool pile, we have a ratchet wrench. You can either use powered or manual. We have a pair of needle nose pliers and a pair of cutters. We have some Allen keys, a socket extension. We have a 10, 12, and 14 millimeter socket. We also have a number 1 and a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. We've got a couple options of panel removal tools, and then we have a knife or razor blade that we'll use to cut the hole in our firewall grommet for a power wire. Now that we've gone over a few of the tools that you will need to complete this job, we're going to cover some specifics about the amplifier mounting bracket before we get into the truck. So I'm going to clear some of this stuff out of the way and we'll talk about mounting the amplifier to the amp mounting bracket. Wanted to cover the amplifier mounting bracket in a little closer detail for you guys. So when you get your bundle from us, you will receive one of these amplifier mounting brackets and a package of nuts, bolts, and washers. It's going to be labeled amplifier mounting screws. So the important thing to note here is, depending on which amplifier kit that you get, whether it's the Kicker, the Alpine, or the AudX, the amp mounting bracket that you receive will already be drilled out for the amplifier that you've ordered. This is one that I pulled off the shelf and are using for demonstration in this video. So if you notice that there's a bunch of holes drilled in it, I have it drilled out for all 3 amplifiers, but the amplifier that you order will correspond with the holes in the amp mounting bracket. So the way that we're going to mount these amplifiers, we pour our hardware out here. So you're going to have 5 of these bolts. You're going to have 5 flat washers. So we'll kind of get our little piles here. And then you're going to have 5 split washers and then 5 hex nuts. Now you may be asking, Brian, why did you include 5? Well, these parts are small and we know that sometimes you drop them and they roll across the floor. So we've gone ahead and thrown in 1 extra of all of those parts for you. So the way that we recommend attaching the amplifiers is we're going to take the bolt, we're going to put on a split washer and then a flat washer, and then you can put it up through the bracket. You can put the amplifier on, and then you're going to use the hex nut to tighten everything down. I'll grab one of these amplifiers. So you can see that on the Kicker amplifier, there's these little mounting tabs. Again, that's what you're going to use to mount the amplifier down to the bracket. So each of the amplifiers will have some sort of mounting flange And all you're doing is lining these holes up with the holes in your amp bracket and then using the provided hardware to mount it down. And I'll show you that a little bit more in detail once we get to that step inside the truck. The AudX amplifier comes with a bass control knob in the box. The kicker, we will provide you a kicker bass control knob, and the Alpine amp will provide you the Alpine, but essentially the bass control knob itself is all exactly the same. So if you want to use just the bass control knob as is, it does have a couple of little spots here, or you can use some double-sided tape to mount the bass control knob wherever you want. If you'd like to install it in one of the switch blanks in your dash, you can use our 3D printed switch blank mount here. So to use the switch mount, we need to take the guts out of the bass control knob and move it over to the switch blank. So to do that, pretty simple. The knob itself, we're going to pull off, and then you'll notice there's a little lock collar here. Sometimes you can get it, or grab a pair of pliers. Doesn't usually take much. Once you break it loose, you can spin that little lock collar off. We're going to save that. And then on the back side of the bass control knob, there's this little cover that will just pop right off, and then we can remove the adjustment stem and the circuit board. We can grab our switch blank, and then we're going to line this up like that so that the circuit board is not touching or is not pointed towards either of the legs on the switch blank. And then what we can do is grab our little lock collar, and we're going to get that on there and then just snug it up just a little bit with the pliers. Now we need to just decide which way we're going to mount the bass control knob, and then what we'll do is we'll turn the adjustment stem all the way to the left. So it has a hard stop all the way to the left and all the way to the right. We're going to hard stop it all the way to the left, and then when we look on our bass control knob itself, you'll see a little indicator mark. We're going to line that indicator mark up with kind of the 7 o'clock position, so it will correlate. And then as we rotate this, the indicator is now all the way at the top position, so that way we know that the little indicator mark is actually lined up with the adjustment stem. So that is the bass control knob, and now this is ready to be installed in our truck. So now that we've gone over those few things, let's go ahead and jump into the truck and we'll get started with disassembly. Let's begin disassembly of our Tundra. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take out the head unit. We're going to remove the center console, and then we're going to move over and take out the front passenger seat to make room for our amplifier. Removing the center console will give us a way to run our harness up to the radio. So let's get started with the radio, and then we'll work our way down. To do that, you're going to need a panel tool and a 10mm socket. To remove the radio, we need to start with this lower panel. You see there's a little gap right here, so we're going to take our panel tool and insert it, and then we're going to pry out to release the clips. There we go, we got one out. And you just kind of work your tool across, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pull straight back towards us. And just to give you guys the best view of this, I'm going to go ahead and release all of the connectors. So each of these, there's just a tab. You're going to depress the tab and remove the connector. Now, depending on your trim level or your options in your truck, you may not have this many connectors, or you may have all of these connectors. With that panel removed, we can reach in and grab the HVAC panel. And again, we're going to pull it straight back towards us. There is one connector on the back. Again, depress the tab and remove. Now we have 4 10mm bolts. There are 2 here in the front, and then there's 2 on the sides. So for that, I'm going to recommend an extension with a 10mm socket. There's 1. The 2 in the front. Now we'll get the 2 in the back. All right, there we are. Now, normally I would say put these in the cup holder for safekeeping, but here in a second we're going to take the cup holder out. So go ahead and set these off somewhere safe that you know where they will be. I'm just going to put them right here on the floorboard. All right, now we're ready to remove the radio. So in this case, it's a factory radio. So again, put your hands behind, and then we're going to pull straight out towards ourselves. We're going to go ahead and disconnect all of the connections on the back of the radio. This is a 2021 Tundra, so the connections may look a little bit different if you have a 2014 to 2019, but that's completely okay. On this radio though, I will show you the AM/FM antenna adapter is here all the way towards the driver's side, and the black 10-pin connector that I was talking about is over here. So those will be 2 of the main connectors that you will need, but we'll cover that in a little bit more detail here shortly. But for right now, we're going to depress the tabs and just remove all of the connectors. All right, factory head unit is out. Now that we have the head unit and the center of the dash out, let's go ahead and remove the console. The first thing that we're going to do is take off the shift knob. This will just unscrew counterclockwise. Set that to the side. Now we're going to want to open the armrest. And then right here you'll see the gap where this panel meets under the armrest. A lot of times it's pretty stiff getting it off there, so panel tool is definitely helpful. So we're going to insert our panel tool, and then we can kind of, here we go, use it to pry up. All right, now that that's released, the rest of the panel will come up. We'll work it around the shifter and remove the center console. Now we have the complete center of the truck opened up. This will give us enough room to run our main harness through the transmission tunnel and up to the radio. So now we need to jump over to the passenger side and get the seat out, and that will make room for our amplifier. Next on the docket is the front passenger seat. So we're going to grab our 14mm socket. We're going to start with the 2 front seat bolts, and then we will get the 2 rear seat bolts out. So let's go ahead and get the front ones. All right, there are the front. Now what we want to do is slide our seat forward so that we can get access to the rear seat bolts. For the rear, we need to remove the plastic covers. You can do this by just grabbing each side and pulling them straight back. They just have that 1 pin in the middle that holds it. We'll pop those off, and now we'll remove our other 2 seat bolts. Now with those removed, we can move back to the front. We'll disconnect the seat and get it out. Go ahead and slide the seat back, and then we can lean the seat back. That will give us access to the connections on the bottom. And we will go ahead and remove the 3 connectors. Again, depress the tab and remove each of the connectors. The yellow one is going to be the trickiest. It's a 2-action. So the first thing you'll do is depress the white tab, slide the collar on the connector up, and then you can depress the tab a second time, and that will actually release it from the seat. So we can tuck that out of the way for right now, and now we can fully remove our passenger seat. If you've gotten this far in the disassembly process and just now discovered that you have this little black box under the passenger seat of your Tundra, no worries, that is your factory amplifier. So in the Tundra, there is a non-amplified option, which means you have no amplifier, and then there is an amplified non-JBL. So this truck, that's exactly what that is. It is the non-branded amplifier. If you ordered the kit for a non-amplified truck and now you discover that you have this amplifier, not a big deal. Contact our support team. We will help get you the correct parts that you need to finish the installation. The rest of your kit is completely compatible. You just need one more harness to make it work in your amplified non-JBL application. If you've gotten to this point and you don't have this black box, that means you have a non-amplified truck and you can skip over the removal of this amplifier. But removing this amplifier is super simple. All we need is our trusty 10mm socket, and when we pull back the carpet, both to the front and the rear of this amplifier, you will notice that there are 3 10mm bolts. So we can take our 10mm socket and get all 3 of those out. The 3 bolts that you take out, you will want to hold on to those because that's what we're going to use to mount our amplifier mounting bracket. So I'm going to set these up here in a safe spot for a little bit later. To finish removing the amplifier, there are 2 plugs that connect from the wiring harness under the seat into the amplifier. You can just reach in again, depress the tabs. So there we are, 2 connectors. You got tabs on the top, just depress those, and then we can remove our factory amplifier, and this can go in the parts bin because we're no longer going to need it. We're going to install our new 5-channel amplifier. All right, disassembly is almost complete. We need to do a few more things and remove some plastic panels. We're going to remove the door sills on the front door and the rear door on the passenger side. We're going to use that wiring channel to run some of our power and ground wire and our subwoofer wire. So if you're also installing the subwoofer, we're going to use that channel to get our wire back to behind the back seat. So super simple to get these off. You can either use a panel tool or sometimes just use your fingers. So the sill plates, we're going to reach under and we're just going to pull up. And you can hear the little pins release. There we go. So just a couple little plastic tabs there holding that in. We also need to remove the kick panel. So there's a plastic retainer up here. You can just twist that counterclockwise until it comes off. And then you can grab your kick panel. There we go. Pull it out. And sometimes the pins will come out, and that's completely fine. Just grab them and insert them back into the panel so that we can use them to reattach later. Sometimes they stay in the panel, so we'll get our panel tool and remove it and put it back in the kick panel for later. Another panel we're going to remove to make life easy on ourselves is this trim panel right here over the glove box. So we're going to use a plastic panel tool here. We're just going to insert it along the edge And once you start to pry out a little bit, there we go. Now that we got it loosened up, just pop that out. You can see it's just held in with clips. So we'll set this off to the side. Now, the reason that we removed this panel is because when we run our main harness here in a second, the way we're going to do is we're going to go kind of down the side of the transmission tunnel, and then there's a good hole back here in the dash that's more easily accessible down through this panel. So we're going to use a wire fish, or if you have a coat hanger or something, we're going to feed it down through here. We're going to grab our harness, and then that way we can pull it up into this area above the glove box and then run it over to the radio cavity itself. So one little trick that I like to do is, if you have some sort of light, if you shine the light at the bottom of the dash and you look back down in there, you'll see where the light comes through, and that is the route that we're trying to take. So let's grab our wire fish, we'll run it down through there, and we'll start running our main amplifier harness. All right, extend out some of our wire fish. And like I said, if you have a flashlight or some sort of work light, if you put it right down at the bottom of the carpet next to the transmission tunnel and shine it up, you can see where the light comes through. We're just going to work our wire fish down and get it to come out in the floorboard. So there we are. So we have our wire fish. Now, if you have your main harness, we're going to use the radio end of the harness. So that's the side with the T harnesses and our adapter. You can see that the harness itself is labeled radio on one end and amplifier on the other. So we can go ahead and secure the radio end of our harness to our wire fish, and then we're going to work it back up through the dash, kind of coming out the same hole we put the wire fish in, and then we'll work it across. All right, now we have our T harness and our 3.5mm headphone jack secured to our wire fish. Going to gently work it up through the dash, kind of pulling with one hand, pushing with the other hand. I want to make sure we get all of our adapters through. All right, there we are. Let's go ahead and untape our wire fish, get it out of the way. All right, so we have our radio T harness. We also have, again, like I said, 3.5mm headphone jack for the bass control knob. So we're going to start with the T harness. We need to run this directly over to the radio cavity, and then we will run the 3.5mm headphone jack to where we want to put our bass control knob. Like I said, this is completely up to you where you want to put the bass control knob. You can use it, like I said, with the provided switch blank to fill one of the switch blanks in your dash if you have one. You can use the knob mount itself to mount it wherever you want. So that cable is just going to go wherever you need it to go, but the radio T harness definitely needs to go behind the radio. So if you just reach in through the radio cavity, it's a pretty easy shot. You just pull that straight across. Before we start making connections to the head unit, we're going to run our bass control knob down to that lower panel. So if you have a switch blank down there, you can use that for your bass control knob. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to run it kind of, there's this black plastic piece that holds the radio. If you go behind it, you push this gray foam in, you can get that to come right down the front of the dash, And then what we'll do is right now, we'll just bring it down there where it's right next to all of the other connections that were in that lower switch panel, and we'll leave the base control knob there for later. Now we can go ahead and grab our radio, and then in the next several segments I'm going to cover how to make the connections from your amplifier main harness to your radio. So there's going to be 4 total segments here. You have the 2014 to 2019 with a factory head unit, 2014 to 2019 with an aftermarket head unit, 20 to 21 with a factory, and 20 to 21 with an aftermarket head unit. So find that section of the video coming up that corresponds to the truck and the options that you have, and follow those instructions, and then meet back up with me when we continue running the rest of the wires for our amplifier. In this segment of the video, I'm going to cover the head unit connections from the amplifier harness to a factory head unit in a 2014 to 2019 Toyota Tundra. If you selected that you have a 2014 to 2019 Toyota Tundra and you have a factory head unit, you are going to receive this T-harness here. It's going to have 2 male and 2 female connectors. These are a 6 and 10 pin connector on each side. So to make the connections behind the head unit, what you're going to do is you're going to find these 6 and 10 pin plugs that come from your dash that connect to your factory head unit. You're going to disconnect those by depressing the tab and removing them. The connections coming out of the truck will be male connections. You're going to plug those into the female side of the T-harness, and then the male side of our T-harness will go right back into the factory head unit. The only other connection that needs to be made is if you want to use the grounding wire. There's a little ring terminal here. You're just going to want to remove one of the bolts that holds the factory bracket to the side of your factory head unit. Remove it, put the bolt through the ring terminal, and then re-secure the grounding wire. So again, super simple, super easy plug and play installation. In this segment, I'm going to cover how to connect your amplifier harness to your 2014 to 2019 Toyota Tundra with an aftermarket head unit. If you have an aftermarket head unit, you more than likely have RCA pre-outs on the back of the head unit. So on our harness, you're going to connect the RCAs to the RCAs coming out of the back of the head unit. You can see that these are nicely labeled front, rear, and sub, and the colors on the RCAs also correspond with your white, gray, green, and purple standardized aftermarket audio coloring. And then you also have a sub left and sub right. So these will connect to the RCAs from your radio. And then the other side of the T-harness, we're going to disconnect the 6 and 10 pin connectors from the back of the head unit. The connections coming from your dash will be male connectors. Those will plug into the 6 and 10 pin female connectors from the T-harness, and then the 6 and 10 pin male connectors will connect back to your aftermarket radio wiring. The only other connection that needs to be made is the optional ground wire. If you want to ground this, just find a suitable ground, a good metal to metal contact, and use the provided ring terminal to ground out the harness. In this segment, I'm going to cover how to make the connections from your amplifier harness to the factory head unit in your 2020 or 2021 Toyota Tundra. On the T-harness that you will receive, there will be a 10-pin connector, a male and a female. So on the back of your factory head unit, you're going to find the one black 10-pin connector. You're going to remove it from the radio. The connector that you removed will be a male end. You're going to connect that to the female end of the harness, and then the black male 10-pin connector from our T-harness will go directly back into the back of the factory radio. We also need to connect our remote wire T-harness. So this is going to connect to your AM/FM antenna. So you will find the AM/FM antenna connector on the back of your factory head unit, disconnect it. That wire coming from the dash will then again connect that will be a male. It will connect into the female side of the T-harness, and then the male side of the T-harness will connect back into your factory radio. The last thing is the ground wire. You can remove one of the bolts that holds the factory side bracket onto the radio, remove it, run it through the ring terminal, and then re-secure it back to the factory head unit. In this segment, I'm going to cover how to connect your amplifier main harness to your aftermarket head unit in your 2020 or 2021 Toyota Tundra. On the T-harness that you receive, you will have 3 RCA adapters. These will connect to the RCA pre-outs from your aftermarket head unit. They are nicely labeled front, rear, and sub, and the fronts and rears all correspond with your standard white, gray, green, and purple aftermarket coloring for your audio outputs. So the RCAs will connect to the RCAs from your radio, and then the 10-pin connector from your truck to your aftermarket radio harness will be disconnected, and then you will plug the male plug coming from your vehicle into the female side of the T-harness. We'll also need to connect our remote wire T-harness. So we're going to find the AM/FM antenna connector from your truck, disconnect it. The male end coming from the truck, again, will go into the female side of the T-harness, and then the male side of the T-harness will connect back to your radio adapter. And then the last thing is the ground wire. If you choose to use the ground wire, you will just need to find a suitable grounding location, a good metal-to-metal contact, and use the supplied ring terminal to secure your ground wire. Like I said, follow along to the section of the video that corresponds to your truck, but to show you kind of how it's supposed to go, I'm going to install this factory head unit back in this 21 Tundra. So one of the first things I want to do is we're going to install the included ground wire. So you'll see here on the side of the head unit, the bracket, there's a couple of screws. We're going to take one of those out, and then that's how we're going to ground our harness. So just take your Phillips head screwdriver or a socket, and remove the little screw. Put it through your ring terminal, and then reattach the screw. Get that nice and snug. You can see it's just laid flat, kind of out of the way, so it doesn't get caught up when we go to reinstall the head unit. So we can set that right there. Now let's start making connections from our T-harness. So the first thing we're going to do is the remote wire T-harness. So if we go over here and we find the factory antenna plugs coming out of the truck, you got one right here is an AM/FM. So the male end is going to go into the female end of our T-harness, and then the male end of the T-harness will connect directly back into the back of the radio. So the remote wire is going to send signal from the head unit down to the amplifier, letting the amplifier know that the truck and the head unit are turned on, so it also needs to be turned on. So if you get to the end of your installation and your amplifier is not turning on, it more than likely means that your remote wire is not connected. Therefore, the amplifier doesn't even know to turn on. So that's always big troubleshooting step, is double check to make sure your remote wire is fully connected. All right, next up, we have the two ends here of our T-harness. So on our main vehicle wiring, we're going to find our black 10-pin connector, and that is going to go into the female connector from our T-harness. And then the 10-pin connector goes back into the back of the radio. And that is all of the connections from our T-harness. Now all we need to do is reconnect the rest of the factory wiring. Good thing about these, they only fit one spot. So all we're doing is just lining them back up and plugging them back in. And then the black and the white, these are the navigation and the Sirius XM antennas. So the black to the black and the white to the cream there. And then that is all of our connections to the head unit. Just double check. Yep, everything's plugged in. So now we can tuck this bit back in the dash. And we can go ahead and set our radio back in place and lock it in, because everything else that we need to connect is now going to be on the floor. Now we have the connections to our head unit done. Now we just need to tidy up the rest of our main harness going back to under the seat. So to do that, we can, down here in the floorboard, we can just take our harness and we're just going to tuck it under the plastic here. There's enough room where you can just kind of pull the plastic out a little bit and tuck our harness up in the transmission tunnel. And then when we get to this split in the carpet, that's where we can pull this down, lift up on the air duct, and we can work our amplifier harness under, and then we can make it come out of the carpet with the rest of the connections. Make sure to tuck your carpet away. All right, so there we are. We have the input and output sides of our amplifier harness. Next up, we're going to grab the ground wire that's provided in your kit along with the grounding bolt. And then if you have the amplified non-JBL Tundra, we're also going to grab the supplied amp bypass harness and go ahead and make those connections, and then we'll move on to the power wire. We're going to begin with the installation of our amplifier grounding wire. So you'll see that one end has a ring terminal and the other has a wire ferrule. We're going to use the ring terminal and the supplied 10mm bolt to ground our amplifier under the seat. So if we pull back the carpet a little bit, so right here on the floor cross member is a factory ground. So if you have that there, you can definitely reuse that bolt that is already there. If not, you need to ground it someplace else. We've provided you one. But let's go ahead and just reuse the factory one. So we're going to remove that 10mm socket for that. And then we're going to insert that bolt back through the ring terminal. And I always recommend starting these by hand. We don't want to cross thread the bolt. And then we'll tighten this down. All right, there we go. That end is nice and secure. We'll leave the other end loose for right now until we get our amplifier in place. Next up, we need to talk about the connections that you removed from your non-JBL amplifier. If, like I said, if your truck is the amplified non-JBL, earlier we removed those two plugs from the factory amplifier. Included in your kit will be this little bypass harness. So basically what this is going to do is bypass those connections so that we feed the signal all the way around so that it actually makes it out to your speakers when we install our new kit. So you'll see that it has two connections on it. These are just, you're just going to match these up. The yellow wire on this adapter is not needed. So we're going to line the connectors up and snap them into place. And there we go. We have successfully bypassed the factory amplifier. We can tuck that away. I would also suggest maybe securing this with a zip tie just to keep everything nice and tidy, but we can do that at the end once we have all of our wires in place. So now we have our amplifier harness, we have our ground, and we have our amp bypass if you needed to do that. So the next thing we need to do is run the power wire from the battery all the way down through the firewall to get it to our amplifier location. So in your kit, you're going to receive a couple pieces of power wire. You're going to have a short piece with a ring terminal here. This is going to connect eventually to the positive terminal on your battery. And then you're also going to receive an inline fuse. So the battery on your Tundra here is behind the left headlight. So what we need to do is we're going to run our power wire from the battery. We're going to go along the fender, along the back of the firewall, and down through the firewall grommet. That's going to get our power wire down in the cab and under the seat to connect to our amplifier. First, we're going to set up our inline fuse. So we can go ahead and take the cover off of it, and then we're going to use our Allen wrench to loosen up. There's 2 set screws, and sometimes they have a little piece of rubber on the inside. So go ahead and loosen up both sides. Make sure, again, you don't have anything in there. We're going to grab the short section. Go ahead and place the wire ferrule in, and then we're going to tighten down the set screw. I'm going to grab one of our wired ferruled ends of our long power wire. We will insert in the other side of the inline fuse and tighten the set screw. All right, now we have both ends connected. We can replace our cover. We're going to mock up our inline fuse and kind of figure out where we want to mount it. There are a few holes here in the bottom, so you can use like a zip tie or a piece of Velcro or double-sided tape to mount that if you choose. Kind of up to you and what's best for the accessories or where you want to install your stuff. The great thing about the Tundra is you have this cover back here that is a nice hidden spot to run your wire. Make sure that we keep it up and away from the motor, any hot or moving parts. So to get that cover off, there are a bunch of these little plastic retainers. We can go ahead and remove those by twisting them counterclockwise, and they will come off. And then we'll do that for the rest of them, and then drop that panel, and we'll start to run our power wire. All right, there we go. All we need to do is just drop that panel down. You can see this customer's already got some stuff run back there. So we're gonna just kind of keep it as tight to the fender as possible and work it around just how this other wires run across. Now that the wires ran over here, there was a factory wire spot here. I'm going to just put one zip tie there to hold it. Trim off the excess, and then we can put the cover back up. Start with the one here in the middle. Push that retainer back in place. There we are. Now we have power wire run across. Next thing we need to do is we're going to use our knife to make a hole in the firewall grommet so that we can get our wire down into the cab. So right here next to the main wire harness, you can see this truck actually already had a hole cut in it from previous installation, but this is kind of what we're going for. We want to make an X cut here. We want to stay away from the main wiring harness. So I like to use one of these little retractable utility knives. That way we can go in and make a little cut. There we go. And then we can extend it out because the firewall grommet has an inner and an outer layer. So now we can extend that out and go ahead and cut a little bit bigger hole. There we go. Felt it pop through the inside. So now that we have the hole cut, you can either use a wire fish or the ferrule on the end here. Should be able to push that through. There it goes. It's feeding in nicely. Make sure you don't get it caught up on anything. Once we get 6 or 8 inches of that through, now we should be able to grab it on the floorboard and pull out the rest of the slack. Here we go. Here's our power wire. We're going to pull all the slack out of the power wire. We can tuck it under the rest of this factory wiring. And now we can run it through this factory wiring channel. And we pull back our carpet. Now that we have our power, ground, and our main harness routed to where the amplifier is going to go, I'm going to go over the connections of each amplifier in detail. First thing that we need to do is we need to mount our kicker amplifier to the amplifier mounting bracket. So we'll get our amplifier mounting bracket, we'll get our hardware, and we'll get our amplifier. The bracket that you receive will have the holes drilled in it for the amplifier that you ordered. So you're just going to line up the holes in the mounting feet, a bolt, split washer, flat washer. We're going to go up through the bottom of the bracket, through the hole in the mounting tab, and then secure it with the hex nut. We're going to repeat this process for all 4 corners. Now that we have all of our hardware started, I'm just going to snug these up. Okay. All right, now we have our amplifier mounted to the bracket. Now we need to tidy up our wires and get our carpet back in place. So we need our seat connections, our power, our ground, and our amplifier harness. We want it to go back through the hole in the carpet. And then this flap here where the factory amplifier went, I'd recommend folding that under. And the flap here where all of your wires went through, I would recommend folding that under as well. All right, so there's power, ground, and all of our wires. Now we can grab the amplifier. We're going to peel back this flap. That's where the factory amp was mounted. Make sure these holes line up. And then we're going to secure it with the factory bolts. I'm just going to start them loosely for right now. And then make sure that you have enough slack in your wires to get to where they need to go. So power and ground on this side. So have enough there. That can reach, that can reach. Okay. Straighten that up and then we'll tighten down the amp bracket. We can tuck this little bit of carpet under, and now our amplifier is securely attached and the carpet's all back and looks nice. So now it's time to start making some connections to the amplifier itself. We're going to start on the back side with the RCAs on the input side. All right, so here on the input side of this kicker amplifier, you have amp 1 is going to be your front channels, so front, left, front, right. Amp 2 is your rear channels, rear, left, rear, right. And then you have sub left and sub right. And then you have all of your control features here. We'll cover these more in depth when we get to tuning the amplifier. Here is your remote bass port. So if you're using the bass control knob in the bag with the bass control knob is this harness. It's got a remote wire and a 3.5mm headphone jack that connects to the 4-pin Molex on the harness. So you're going to want to use that again if you're using the bass control knob. And then the other thing that we'll want to do is if you have a T10 Torx, we're going to mount or secure the ground wire of the amplifier to this little screw right here. You could also attach it to one of your amplifier mounting brackets or pretty much anywhere, but this seems to be a good little spot. So we'll start with that. So we'll use our T10 Torx. Take this screw out. I'm going to run it through the little ring terminal and then put the screw right back where it came out of. All right, so we have that secured. We're now going to hook up the RCAs, and these are all labeled for you. So and they do follow the white, gray, green, purple. So white says front left channel 1, front right channel 2. So white is going to go amp 1 left, gray is going to go amp 1 right. Green is going to go amp 2 left, and then purple is going to go amp 2 right. Orange is going to go sub left, and brown is going to go sub right. So there are the input side connections. And then on that harness, and then we'll grab our 3.5mm headphone jack off of our bass control knob, and that is going to connect into the remote bass port, like so. And then we can tidy up the wires here, and we'll work them around because the remote wire and our output side are going to go on the other side of the amplifier. Moving to the output side of the amplifier, here from the left, we have GND, or ground. That's where our black ground cable will go. REM for remote. That's where our blue and with a white stripe remote wire will connect. Plus 12V, that's your power, your red power wire from the battery. And then moving over to the speaker connections, again, we have an amp 1 and amp 2. So amp 1 is going to run across the top row. So you've got your positive and negative for left, positive and negative for right front, rear left, rear right, and then sub is split. So your positive sub is actually on top, and your negative sub or your sub right is on the bottom. So what we want to do is take our Phillips head screwdriver, make sure that we loosen all of these set screws for our speaker wires. Take our Allen key, make sure that all of our set screws for our power, ground, and remote are loosened up. And now we can start making connections. So I'm going to start with the ground wire. We're going to insert the wire ferrule all the way in. So the black ground wire goes into GND. And we can tighten this down. And just like we did before, give it a little bit of a wiggle. And then tighten the set screw down. We'll just move straight across off of our remote bass knob. 4-pin Molex connector. You have the blue wire with a white stripe. It is also labeled remote turn on. That's going to go into REM. So push that in until the metal ferrule gets under the set screw. And tighten that down. Next up is our power wire. So we have our red power wire. Again, push that all the way in. And then we can tighten down the set screw. Again, we do not have power connected at the battery yet. We don't want this live until we get everything connected. So that is tightened down. Now on the speaker connections, so the kicker, your adapter should have forks on it. Again, these are labeled front left, front right, rear left, and rear right. We want to start with the rear channels first, because if you start with the fronts, then you won't be able to get to the set screws for the rears. So we're going to find, here's our rear left and rear right. So what I'm going to do is start with the purple. And on all of these, you can also see that the red fork is the positive of the pair and the black fork is the negative. So we'll start with rear right negative. So that's going to be the black fork there. Tighten that down. And then we'll do the solid purple. All right, now we have our purples. Now we're going to get our rear left, this channel 3. So it's our green. So we're going to do the negative. Do the positive, solid green. Now we'll move to our front channels. So we'll get our grays. Those are going to be our front right. our solid gray. And lastly is the front left, or the white. So we'll do white with a black stripe with the black fork. Solid white. All right. So we have white, white with a black stripe, gray, gray with a black stripe. Bottom row is green, green with a black stripe, and then purple, purple with a black stripe. Now, if you're going to add a subwoofer, we're going to add our subwire here. If you're not adding a subwoofer for right now, you can just tighten these terminals down and they will be unused, but just know that if you're going to add a subwoofer in the future, you just need to connect your wires right here and run them to your sub enclosure. All right, if we're going to connect our sub wires, so here we have a yellow and black pair. We're going to use the black as the negative. So again, that's going to go on the bottom row. And then your positive part of your sub wire, whether it's yellow or red or whatever other color, it's going to go on the top. All right, with your subwoofer wire connected to your amplifier, then you just need to run the sub wire to your subwoofer enclosure and then plug in the positive and negative wires accordingly. So at this point, we have the output side of the amplifier connected. We have the input side, the power ground, and the remote. Our head unit is connected. Now we can jump up under the hood and connect it to the battery and give it a test. Now we're ready to install our Alpine amplifier into our Tundra. So we're gonna go ahead and unpack the amplifier itself. There's gonna be a couple of parts bags that you will need. One of those will contain these little end caps. These will go on last. And then there's also a bag with some hardware. The hardware has a Allen key for your set screws of your amplifier. And it also has the little tiny Phillips head screws to secure those end caps. So we're gonna go ahead and get our Allen key out of our hardware bag, and we'll leave the rest of the screws in the bag for right now. Now we need our amplifier and our amp mounting plate. So we're going to line up. You can see in each of the feet on the amplifier there's a mounting hole. We're going to line up those holes with the holes in our amp bracket, and we're going to mount the amplifier so that the power and ground and the wire ferrule connections here are facing towards the front of the truck, which corresponds with the 2 mounting holes in your amplifier mounting bracket. As discussed earlier, get your amplifier mounting bracket screws out. You're going to do the bolt, the split washer, then the flat washer. Then we can put the bolt up through the bottom of the amp mounting bracket, get it lined up, and then we will secure it with the hex nut. We will repeat that process for all 4 of the mounting feet. Now that we have all 4 started, we'll use our Phillips head screwdriver and a pair of pliers to snug everything down. All right, now we have our amp mounted to the bracket. It's now time to mount the bracket to the floor of the truck. So we have all of our wires over here out of the way. There's a little flap here. We're going to fold that flap under, gives us access to this mounting hole here, and then we can pull back this flap, and that's the other two mounting holes. So we'll line up our amplifier, and then we'll use our factory hardware that we had to remove the factory amplifier. And we'll get these started. Now that we have that started, we can tighten it down. There we are. The amplifier is now securely mounted to the truck. Now it is time to start with our connections. We're going to start on the input side of the amplifier, which is now towards the back seat. All right, so as we look at the input side of our amplifier, we have our RCA connections as well as all of our control switches and dials. On your harness, we're going to use the RCA ends here. These are going to be our inputs. And then we also have our ground cable. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect the ground cable first. And what we're going to do is actually use this little screw right here in the middle of the amplifier. You can either use that one or this one up here. You can also use the mounting screws for the amp bracket if you prefer to do that. So we're going to take our number 1 Phillips. We're going to remove that little screw, put it through the ring terminal, and then we can re-secure it back into the amplifier. All right, there we are. Now it's time to connect our RCAs. So you can see here we have channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, and then our sub left and right. On our RCAs, they are also labeled channels 1, 2, 3, and 4. So here's white is channel 1. So we're going to go white to white, gray, front right, channel 2. So gray to red. Green is going to be your channel 3. So it's going to be green to the white in the second row. Purple is channel 4. And then on our subwoofer, we have orange is sub left and brown is sub right. So now we have our inputs connected. If you're opting to use the bass control knob in your bass control knob kit, you will receive this harness that has the remote wire and this telephone looking jack that is going to be for your bass control. The remote wire is going to get connected to the other side of the amplifier. So we're going to take the telephone jack, and you'll see the port right there. Just going to connect that in, and we can tidy up our wires because we're going to move around to the other side of the amplifier to make the rest of our connections. Moving around to the output side of our amplifier and the power side. So here we have GND, that's going to be our ground, that's where our black ground cable is going to go. REM is the remote wire input, so the blue wire with the white stripe off of your main harness, that's where it's going to connect. BATT, that's battery, that's your red power wire. And then here on the speakers, you have channel 1 and 2, 3, and 4. And then the top row is the positive, so the solid color wire, and then the bottom row is the negative. So channel 1 is going to be white, so you'll have solid white and then white with a black stripe, gray, gray with a black stripe, green, green with a black stripe, purple, purple with a black stripe, and then your sub wire, so your sub positive will be red and your sub negative will be black. To connect those, we need our provided Allen key. First thing we need to do is loosen up all of the set screws. right, now we have all of our set screws loosened up. We can start making our connections. So we're just going to start from this side and work our way over. So first up is the ground. So we need to get our black ground wire. And we're going to insert the wire ferrule into the terminal. And we're going to make sure that's pushed all the way in, and then use your Allen key to tighten that set screw back down. Give it a little wiggle, and then I want to make sure that's nice and secure. Next up is the remote wire. So we're going to grab the blue wire with a white stripe. It's also labeled remote turn on. Again, insert the wire ferrule and then tighten down the set screw, making sure that we're making contact with the metal part of the wire ferrule. Again, like I said, if you're not getting your amplifier to turn on, is more than likely an issue with your remote wire. So make sure that is nice and secure. Next up is battery, so our red power wire. Again, insert that all the way in, and let's tighten down the set screw. All right, now we can move to our speaker wires. So on our harness, you will have your speaker wires with wire ferrules. Again, these are all labeled just like the other side. So FL is your front left channel 1. So like I said, we're going to start with channel 4. So we want to find our purples. And then these are also color coded. So the purple with the black stripe has the black wire ferrule on it. The positive, the solid colored purple, has the red. All right, we're going to start with our purple with the black stripe, and that's going to go in channel 4. So the negative wire goes on the bottom. So then we're going to do solid purple on the top. Now we're going to find our green, so channel 3. Again, starting with the negative wire, the black wire ferrule on the bottom. All right, moving on to gray, that's channel 2. And then last, we have channel 1. It's going to be our white. All right, there we are. So we have white, gray, green, purple, white with the black stripe, gray with the black stripe, green with the black stripe, and then purple with the black stripe along the bottom. If you are installing the subwoofer, we're going to use the provided wire, and again, the black is the negative of the pair, so we'll do sub negative on the bottom. We're going to do the red or the sub positive on the top. All right, there we are. We have our sub wire connected. We have our speakers, we have our power, our ground, and a remote. We can now tidy up this side of the amplifier. So we're going to grab one of our caps. Some little alignment pins. And then out of our parts bag, these little Phillips head screws. We're going to need a couple of those. And then we're going to use our #1 Phillips screwdriver to put those down in the hole there, and then you can secure down the cap. All right. You can repeat the same for the back of the amplifier. The other screws are not going to be needed. All right, so we have all of our connections made to our amplifier. Now is the time that you can tidy up any of the wires along the one side of the amp bracket. There's a couple little slots in there that are perfect for putting your zip ties through to keep all of these wires here on the side nice and tidy. You can tuck away any extra power and ground, and then at this point we can start routing our subwoofer wire back to where your aftermarket subwoofer is going to be located. So you can route that through the carpet and then down the channel to get back to your subwoofer. Now we're going to go over the installation of our AudX 5-channel amplifier. So we're going to need our amplifier mounting bracket screws, and the amp bracket itself. You can see all of the control features are here are on one side of the amplifier. So when we grab our amp mounting bracket, we're going to orient all of that towards the inside of the truck. So the two mounting tabs here go towards the front, the one here goes towards the back, and then all of our controls will be towards the inside of the truck. So we'll grab our hardware, and then you can see as you line up the amplifier, it is going to match up with the holes in the amp mounting bracket, and we'll get this secured. All right, so we're going to take our amplifier, grab your amplifier mounting screws. You're going to do the bolt, the split washer, then the flat washer, and then we can line up our amplifier. Insert your bolt and then put your hex nut on. And we're going to repeat the process for all 4 mounting feet. Now that we have those started, we can get our amplifier lined up where we want it, and now we can go around and snug them all up with a pair of pliers or a wrench and a Phillips head screwdriver. All right, now we have our amplifier mounted to the bracket. The next thing that we want to do is on the amplifier itself, we're going to remove the 4 small screws here. This is going to give us access to all of the controls of our amplifier, so that after we get everything hooked up and we get it tested, then we can have access to that to make our EQ adjustments. Now, using our #1 Phillips, I'm going to carefully remove these. These screws are very tiny. We're going to save our screws and our cover plate, and we're going to set those to the side. Again, these are very, very tiny, so we don't want to lose those. Now we can line up our amplifier with the factory mounting holes in the floor, and we can use our bolts to secure the bracket to the floor. Now we have those started, we can tighten them up. All right, there we are. So amplifier is secured. Now we can start making the connections from our harness and our power and ground to our amplifier. So this AudX harness, we're going to start with it. This is super simple. We have a couple of connectors here. You can see that they correspond with the connections on the side of the amplifier. So we're going to match up our connectors here. So we have our 4-pin remote. That's going to be our remote wire and our base control knob. You have your input. And we have the output. That's going to be the inputs for our speakers, the outputs for our speakers. Now we have our subwoofer and then our power and ground. So to get those ready, we're going to use our Allen key. Now we're going to loosen up the set screws. Grab our provided subwoofer wire. So here we have our subwoofer connection, so you have positive and negative. So our positive is going to be our red wire. So loosen up your set screw so you can get that wire ferrule all the way in there. And go ahead and tighten it down. Same with the negative. If you are not running an aftermarket subwoofer right now, that is fine. You can skip this portion, but if you do need to connect it in the future, this is how you would do it. All right. Now we can set our sub wire to the side so we can run it to where we need to. All right, next up is power and ground. So we're going to grab our other Allen key that came with our amplifier. Get these set screws loosened. Go ahead and connect our ground. So our black ground cable is going to go into GND. Push that wire ferrule all the way in there and then tighten down your set screw. We're going to grab our red power wire. We get the wire ferrule all the way in there. We're going to tighten that one down into the one that says 12 volt. All right, there we are. So we have our speaker wires, our subwoofer wire, and our positive or power and ground connected. Now we can start running our subwoofer wire to your aftermarket subwoofer. And then after that, you can tidy up these wires. There are some slots here in the side of the bracket that you can use to run your zip ties through. Now that you have everything connected to your amplifier and tidied up, you can go up under the hood and connect the power wire actually to the battery so that we can power the amplifier. And now it's time to give your system its first test. Now it's time to connect our battery or positive wire to the battery. So we have our inline fuse mounted. Now we're going to use a 12mm socket to remove the nut on top of the positive terminal. Now, we get a lot of questions when people are doing this, and it is completely normal that sometimes when you connect the wire to the terminal, you get a little spark. That's totally fine. It's not going to hurt anything. So there we are, our little spark. We're going to replace the 12mm nut and tighten it down. All right, now that we have power connected to our amplifier, it's time to jump into the truck and we're going to give it a first test. So we want to power our head unit on, make sure the head unit comes on, make sure our amplifier turns on. After we've confirmed that everything is powered up like it should be, then we can move into how to tune and set your new amplifier and head unit up in your Tundra. So let's go ahead and power this up. All right, let's power our head unit on. I'm just going to put the truck into accessory power for right now. You can see down on the floor, have my amplifier. Got music came on, so that's a good thing. I can see on my amplifier the power indicator light is on and it is turned blue. So on most of the amplifiers, the blue indication means that your amplifier is turned on. It's seeing that remote signal from the head unit and from the truck. So that is on. So now my recommendation is go through the fade and balance setting screen on your head unit and just make sure that when you slide it to front left, front right, rear left, that the music moves correspondingly. That will give you an indication that you have everything connected at the head unit and at the amplifier the way that it should be. All right, let's navigate to our setup menu. All right, so we have that. We're going to go to front left. Yep, move it over to front right. All right, so we have our audio coming out of the appropriate channels. So now we can start tuning our amplifier before we put our truck back together. So we're going to jump over to the workbench and I'm going to go through the setup and the tuning recommendations for each of the amplifiers that are available in this kit. After we go over that, then it will be time to put our truck back together. At this point in the installation, you have your amplifier installed in the truck. Everything is connected. You have your speaker wires, your power, your ground. We've done an initial test to make sure that everything is powering up as it should. Now it's time to start tuning our amplifiers and our head unit to maximize our new audio experience in our truck. So in this tabletop, I'm going to show you how to adjust all of the EQ and the dip switches and the gains and everything on all three amplifiers. So the first one that we're going to go over is the Alpine amplifier. So on the one side here where we plugged our RCAs in, you have your control settings. So we're going to go over these. Starting from the left, you have your turn on type. You can see that this is set to DC, REM, and then on the bottom it says high, low, low. We're going to leave this set to the right. So you take your screwdriver and just push the little dip switch all the way to the right for REM and also low. Moving across the RCAs, you have an input channel. So you can see that this has a 1-2 or 3-4 option. We're going to use this in a 4-channel configuration. So we want our dip switch set to 3-4. Directly below that, you have your sub dip switch for your input channel. And you can see that it's a 1+2+3+4 or sub. We're going to use this in the sub configuration. So again, we're going to move the dip switch to the right. So that's going to tell the amplifier that it is doing 4 channels for the speakers and it's using 1 channel for the subwoofer. Moving up to the top row here, you can see it's broken out into channels 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and then sub across the bottom. So we're going to start with channels 1 and 2. You have gain. Again, gain is just a measure of basically loudness, so that's where you're going to get your power out of the amplifier. and then you have a high pass filter. So a high pass filter is designed to cut out the lower frequencies. Again, we do not want sub bass coming out of our dash speakers or our tweeters, and conversely, we don't want the vocals or the words of the song coming out of our subwoofer. So our high pass filter is going to help limit the sub frequencies, the 50 to like 80, 100 hertz frequencies from playing out of the dash speakers. You're going to have the same thing for channels 3 and 4. So channels 3 and 4 are going to be your rear doors. And then you have the similar, and then for the sub, you have a gain. You have a low pass filter. So a low pass filter, like I just said, is designed to cut out the higher frequencies. So you can see that the gauge here goes from 50 to 400. So 50 obviously being the very low end of sub bass. And then the last one is a bass EQ. We don't recommend using bass EQ. Basically what this is going to do is artificially increase the bass output. It doesn't do it linearly, so generally we like to set the bass level with the gain and not the bass EQ. So for this, we're just going to make sure that it's all the way turned to the left or the lowest position. So now that we've gone over what the dials and the switches do, our general recommendation for tuning the amplifier is we want to send the amplifier the most amount of signal from our source unit or our head unit. So general rule of thumb is on whatever head unit you have in your vehicle, turn the volume of the head unit up to about 75% of its maximum volume. Then we can start adjusting the gains on the amplifier. I generally start with the front channel, adjust the gain, then do the rear channel, adjust the gain, and then do the sub by adjusting the gain to get overall loudness. Then we can start adjusting the high pass and the low pass filters. So for the high pass filters, generally we're going to just kind of set this to, we can turn this. You can see it's got hard stops either way. We're going to turn this to about 90 to 100. So anything lower than 90 to 100 hertz is going to get omitted and not played through that front channel. For the channels 3 and 4, your rear doors, we're going to do about the same. We're going to go about 100 on those, maybe a little closer to 120, as the rear doors usually are like a 6.5 inch speaker, so they're going to play a little less of the mid bass as compared to the front door speakers. And then on the subwoofer, we're going to set that to about 80 hertz. So anything above 80 hertz is not going to get played through the subwoofer. So again, these are just kind of recommended starting points for each of these settings. You can obviously tune these to your ear and how you like to listen to your music. So, you know, if you want a little bit more out of the rear doors, you can just turn the rear gain up a little bit. If you want a little bit more out of the subwoofer, you can turn the gain up a little bit. By setting it to 75% of the maximum volume, that way you're leaving yourself some headroom there. So if, you know, somebody else gets in your vehicle or your kid gets in there and cranks it up, that we have a little bit of safety space left so that we're not going to damage any components. So that is the settings on the Alpine amplifier. Once you're happy with these settings, you can now continue with putting the end caps on and reinstalling the rest of the components of your truck. If you opted for the kicker amplifier, here are the recommended settings and dip switch positions for your kicker 5-channel amplifier. Along the input side of the amplifier, where we have our RCAs connected, these are all of your control switches here. So we're going to go over what each one of these does and a general recommended starting. So the first one here is your fader. This is a push button, so it's either on or off. We want to push that in. We want to allow fade and balance to still work. Below that, we have an input level. This is either a low or high input. So high input would be speaker wires, low input would be our RCAs. So in this case, we're going to have the button pushed out for low. Directly next to it, the last push button is your sub input. It is either set to amp 2 or sub. In our case, we have speakers connected to amp 1 and amp 2. So we're going to push this in for sub. This is going to tell our amplifier that we are using channels 1 through 4 for our speakers, and then the extra channel for our sub. Moving on to our dials, you can see you have amp 1, amp 2, and then your sub controls. In amp 1 and 2, you have a gain and then a crossover setting. So you have a gain for the front, you have a crossover setting for the front, a gain for the rear, and a crossover setting for the rear. And then in sub, we have a gain, we have a crossover setting, and then we also have a bass boost. So let's go with amp 1 first. So your gain, that's going to be basically your measure of loudness. That's how we're going to get power out of the amplifier per each speaker channel. The crossover setting, so you can see this one goes from off to 200 hertz. So what this is going to do is going to limit the frequencies that we're allowing to play through that channel. What we don't want to do is play sub bass or like 50 hertz through the dash speakers or the tweeters. They're not designed to do that, and that will cause damage. We don't want to hear the vocals or the words of the song coming out of the subwoofer, because the subwoofer is not designed to play those frequency ranges. So setting our crossovers is going to help limit that, and then is also going to make our speakers play at their best and play the frequency ranges that they're designed for. So we have that for the front and the rear. And then on gain, on the subwoofer, again, you have a gain, you have a crossover frequencies. You can see this one goes from 50 to 200 hertz. So 50 hertz is going to be the lower end of your sub bass frequency. Generally it's about 50 to 80 to 90 hertz. So this dial goes all the way up to 200. And then the last one is our bass boost. We don't generally recommend using the bass boost. This will artificially increase the gain on the sub level. Most of the times by just adjusting the regular gain, you will definitely get the bass where you want it. So we always recommend just leaving the bass boost set to 0. So when we're setting the gains on our amplifier, what we want to do first is we want to send the amplifier the maximum amount of signal. That way that the amplifier has good power coming in, and then it can amplify it a little bit. So our general recommendation is find a song that's going to play for a few minutes on your head unit, whether it's factory, aftermarket, whatever. Turn the volume up to about 75% of that head unit's maximum volume. That way we have lots of signal coming out of the source unit into the amplifier. Then we can start adjusting the gains on our amplifier. I always start with the front. So you can use your flathead screwdriver and you can turn the dial up. Again, with gain, we're going for overall volume, your desired volume. So once you're happy with the front, you can move to the rear, and then you can also do the subwoofer. Again, you can tweak this to your own personal liking. Sometimes people like a little bit more out of the rear doors, and that's fine. You just turn up the rear gains a little bit more. You might want to dial the fronts back, a little bit more bass. Again, this is a matter of personal preference, but when it comes to the crossovers on the front crossover, we're going to set that kind of about the 12 o'clock position. Again, this goes from 0 to 200. So we want to limit the sub bass frequencies from playing out of our dash speakers. The rear, we're going to do about the same, maybe a little bit more, as generally the rear door or the hatch speakers, depending on the vehicle, are smaller and not designed to play that level of mid bass. And then on the sub crossover, we're going to, again, we're going to set that about the 11 o'clock to the 80 to 90 hertz range. Again, that's going to limit anything above 80 to 90 hertz from playing through our subwoofer. So you can dial these in, again, to personal preference. You can make some fine-tune adjustments in the head unit, but once you're happy with all of your gains and crossovers, it's now time to start putting your truck back together. Now we have all of our connections made to the AudX amplifier with your speaker wires, your subwoofer, your power ground, and remote. We've powered the system on, checked to make sure that the amplifier is turning on. Now it's time to give it a test and also set the EQ and the gains on our new amplifier. So let's go over the control surface of the AudX amplifier. So starting here, we have the input level. This is either a high or low. We can set this to high, auto turn on. So this is a pretty cool feature in the AudX amplifier. It automatically senses when the vehicle is turned on. So we're going to set the auto turn on to the on position. So this is just another failsafe, even though we do have a remote wire connected in this application. By turning the auto turn on to the on position, that will also ensure that the amplifier is detecting when the vehicle is on and that it should also turn on. So now we have 3 zones. You have front, rear, and sub. And we'll start with the front. So you can see the crossover here is set to either a flat or a high pass filter. We're going to set that over to HPF for high pass filter. And then below that you have another HPF or high pass filter setting. It's either a 1X or a 10X. We're going to leave that in the X1 or the 1 times setting, so that way when we get to the control dial, that is actually the numbers and we're not multiplying by 10. You can see here that we have a gain and then a HPF or a high pass filter. So what the high pass filter does is it actually limits the lower frequencies from playing out of that certain channel. So what does that mean? We do not want the sub bass or like the 50 to 80 hertz range playing out of our dash speakers because they're not designed to play sub bass frequencies. And conversely, we don't want the higher frequencies, the 10 to 20K hertz range, think of it, the words of the song or the higher frequencies, we don't want them playing out of the subwoofer because that speaker is not designed to play that. So what we can do is we can limit those frequencies to each channel right here on your amplifier. On the rear, you have pretty much the same setup. You have a crossover, either you have a high pass filter or a BPF or a band pass. We're going to make sure that's set to high pass. And then you also actually have a low pass filter. Again, that's going to limit the higher frequencies. You have a gain dial and you also have a low pass filter dial. And then you have a high pass filter dial. So on the rears, we can actually limit it both ways, so that we make sure that we don't have too high or too low of frequencies playing out of our speakers, which is nice because most of the times in the rear door or the rear hatch, depending on your vehicle, you have like a 6.5-inch speaker, maybe a component, so you may just have a 6.5-inch woofer, maybe coaxial where you have the woofer with the tweeter. So depending on what setup you have in the rear, you can limit out either the low or the high frequencies and get the frequency range right in the area that speaker is designed to play. Next up, you have a 2 or 4 channel switch. We are going to make sure this is in 4 channel. This is going to tell the amplifier that we're using 4 full channels for our speakers. And then when we move to sub, you can see that it has a 2 channel or 5 channel option. We want to make sure that dip switch is in 5 channel. Again, this is telling the amplifier that we're using 4 channels for our speakers and then 1 channel for our subwoofer. Next is phase. Phase is the relation of how the speaker moves on the subwoofer. So a lot of times what happens is if your door speakers are firing this way first and your subwoofer fires this way first, when the 2 speakers move, the sound waves will actually interfere with each other, and sometimes you can get like a muddied signal or just doesn't really sound right. Maybe the bass doesn't hit, maybe the speakers don't sound right. So what phase does is actually on the subwoofer, instead of telling it to move this way first, we can tell it to move this way first. So that way when the speakers all start to move, instead of firing at each other, they're firing back and forth in unison, and it helps clear up that signal. So again, not always needed depending on your vehicle setup, but something you can play with to see if there's any audible difference. But again, the phase just controls the way that the subwoofer moves. You also have gain setting for the sub. You have a low pass filter. So again, low pass filter canceling out or not allowing the higher frequencies to play through. You also have a subsonic switch. And then you have the bass boost. We don't recommend using the bass boost. More times than not, you can get plenty of bass out of your subwoofer just by using the gain and appropriately setting the high pass filter or the low pass filters. So the bass boost, we just generally recommend leaving it set all the way to the left or off. So Now that we've gone over all of the control features, our general recommendation for tuning the amplifier is we want to get the most amount of signal out of our source unit or our head unit. So what we're going to do is we want to find a song that plays for a few minutes continuously. We want to turn the volume on the head unit up to about 75% of its maximum volume. That way we have lots of signal coming out of the head unit and going down to the amplifier. So then the amplifier can amplify that great clean signal and get us good quality sound. And then once we have that set, then we can start with our front gains. So all we're going to do is we're going to turn the gains up. Again, we're going for overall volume. This is a personal preference. So we're going to, you can set your front gains, you can set your rear gains, again, just by turning the dial. And then you can do the subwoofer. Again, a matter of personal preference. Some customers, they like a little bit more out of their rear doors, and that's completely fine. Just adjust the rear gains up a little bit. Maybe you want a little bit less out of the front, adjust the front gains down. Again, we're going for overall volume at this point. Then we can move on to our high and low pass filters. So on our front, this goes from 50 Hertz to 500 Hertz. So we're going to adjust this. We're going to get it somewhere maybe the 11, 12 o'clock position. For the front speakers, we're really trying to limit out 100 Hertz or below. We want to save those frequencies or eliminate those frequencies from playing out of the dash speakers in the front channel. The rear channel, we're going to do about the same, maybe a little bit higher. Again, most of the times you have a 6.5-inch speaker versus maybe a 6x9 or an 8-inch in the front door. So that 6.5 is going to play a little less mid-bass, or a little less of the bass frequency, so we can limit that high pass filter up a little bit. And then the last is our filter for our subwoofer. This one again is 50 to 500. So again, we're going to turn that up to about 80 to 90. Again, now we're limiting everything above that, and we're just saving the 50 to about 90 Hertz range for the subwoofer. So again, you can dial these in to personal preference. You can make some fine-tune adjustments in the head unit, but once you're satisfied with how the truck sounds, both volume and EQ wise, it's now time to replace the cover plate so that we can lock in all of our settings and nothing accidentally gets touched or twisted while it's under the seat. And now we can continue with putting the rest of our truck back together. Now that we have our amplifier tuned, let's put our truck back together. We're going to start with the kick panel. So that's going to go back down here. We're going to line the pins up. Push it into place and then put your retaining nut back. Now it's time to replace the sill plate. So we can line that up. There we are. That's back in place. Now it's time to carefully place your seat back in the truck so that we can make its connections and get it secured with our seat bolts. All right, go ahead and lean the seat back. Now we need to make those 3 connections to the bottom of the seat. So grab our connectors, line up the tabs, and lock those back into place. All right, perfect. Now we can put our seat down, line up the alignment pins. So we have the 2 fronts lined up. Go ahead and start seat bolts by hand. Always recommended to start these by hand so you don't cross thread the bolts. Now we have those started. We'll slide the seat forward and start the rear seat bolts. Get the rear seat bolt started. Now we can grab our 14mm socket and tighten those down. With the rears tightened down, we can replace the plastic caps. Pop those back into place. Now we can slide our seat back and tighten up the front. All right. Seats in. Now we can replace our dash trim. All we're going to do is line up our vent. Snap that back into place. Now we can start to work and put together the rest of the center console and tighten down the radio and wrap up the reassembly. Now we can reinstall the cup holder. So let's open the armrest. Slide that back down, get the front lined up. Push it down into place. And close the console. Next thing we need to do is replace the 4 10mm bolts that hold the head unit in. Now with the head unit secured, we can put the HVAC panel back in place. So make your one connection there, line it up, and push it back into place. We'll grab all of our wires for our lower panel. All right, last little bit of installation we need to do is if you're using the base control knob, I'll show you how it gets installed. We're going to use one of these switch locations here on this lower control panel. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to remove one of these. We get a lot of questions on when a customer doesn't have any more switch blanks to use, how would you connect the either another button or the base control knob? The answer, what we usually say is you can either find another location or, like I said, you can use the body of the base control knob. Maybe you mount it down here on the dash with some double-sided tape. Or if your truck has an option like the glass brake sensor or an auto high beam, something that you don't really use, you never activate the button. So like the glass brake sensor, what we suggest to do is you can, on this panel, if you had that, you can just depress the tabs. You can push out the sensor, reconnect it to the wire inside, and then just tuck it inside your dash. That will free up one of your switch blank locations. And then you can take your base control knob and then again check, make sure we got this turned all the way to the left so our indicator is set to low. We're going to put it in the switch blank location. There we are. Just going to work it in place, and now we have a little base control knob. So when we go to make all of the connections here, we ran our base control knob, that 3.5mm headphone jack. So now all we need to do is just connect that to the back of the base knob, and then we can reconnect the rest of our factory connectors. Once we have all of those connected, we can line up the tabs along the bottom and the top, push that back into place, and then finally, don't forget about your shift knob. Here we are. Now our truck is fully reassembled. We have upgraded it with an awesome 5-channel plug-and-play bundle. Now the only thing that we have left to do is close the hood, turn on our favorite music, and go enjoy our new tunes. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. All right, let's fire this up and see what it really sounds like now. This 5-channel amplifier has totally brought this Tundra to life. So just so that we're talking apples to apples here, this truck is currently set up with the factory Toyota head unit and the factory non-JBL speakers in the dash and the doors. The only thing that we've added to this truck is our 5-channel plug-and-play bundle available at Trail Grid Pro. And this thing sings now. There's more mid-bass in the doors. There's more sound coming out of the tweeters. All around, this is an instant upgrade. This package is going to pair perfectly, like I said, with the factory system. If you add a head unit, if you add speakers, if you add a subwoofer, anything you do that builds off of this awesome 5-channel amplifier is only going to make your truck that much better in the audio, just that much more enjoyable to listen to. So like I said at the beginning of this video, we have all sorts of great plug-and-play options for your 2014 to 2021 Toyota Tundra. Go over to the shop at trailgridpro.com and check those out today. Like I said, head units, speakers, amplifiers, subwoofers, it's all there. You can even add sound deadening. It's all available in the store. Our guys in the shop will personally build this for your truck and ship it out to you. So with that, our written installation guides, and the help of this video, you can install this product in your own driveway or your garage. But in the meantime, have a blast out there.